James, Tyson, and Bree Newsome. Bree, I think you can tell that people are happy you're here. I just got interviewed by a couple of reporters who wanted to know why it was important to this community for you to be with us, and it was... Really? So I know they're going to figure that out when they hear this conversation. James, thank you for being here. Thank you for being local and Warren Wilson and getting her up that flagpole. So we've got Micky ScottBey Jones and Jennifer Bailey. So we got us a bunch of activists up here who love Jesus, or some of them do anyway. I won't speak for all of them. And we want to hear what you got to say. So thank you for coming, and anything we can do to make you more comfortable in our community, let us know. And who do I give this to?
We only have one mic? Is that what we're doing? Or two? Okay. All right. Do you want to start?
Yeah. Well, welcome everyone to this sacred time. I call it sacred space because sometimes sacred space exists outside the four walls of the church, as we've learned this weekend together. And this evening, we get the opportunity to interview two powerful people of God, two saints of God, I would say, who are the physical embodiment of what it means to be God's love here on earth. And it is an honor for us to do so. So thank you, Bree. Thank you, James, for joining us today. And I get to be up here with my sister, Micky, who's my homie, and my sister in ministry. And we're so excited to kick off this conversation today. So I'm going to pass it to Micky for the first question, and we'll get started with the conversation.
And some of you, as you've been here, have had the pleasure of hearing Reverend Jen Bailey, who is co-hosting with me, right? I have been describing her as a theological badass, because that's who she is. So it's a really big treat to be up here together. So I just wanted to go ahead and dive right into kind of the things that you said when you were climbing up the pole and coming down it, and immediately people were recognizing that you were using scripture and biblical language. And I think that was surprising for some people, maybe not surprising for other people. So could you talk a little bit about kind of the theological underpinnings of that act, and maybe even your activism in general? Why scripture and why biblical language as you were doing that?
Thank you so much for having me. I have to say first, I'm honestly just so humbled. It's honestly really kind of surreal. And I think you can probably relate to this as Spirit-led people. I mean, there's certain things that are just the work of the Holy Spirit. And so it's almost like in some ways to have people thank me, or I just give all glory to God. I mean, there are, honestly, all glory to God. I mean, there are times when I perform and I do my little thing on stage. You're like, Bree, that's awesome. I'm like, thank you. That's the talent God blessed me with. But truly, I mean, this experience, especially when I look back on it, it was just purely the Holy Spirit. It really was. I mean, I don't even feel like so much of it was my human strength in that moment. And part of why it was so important to me spiritually to do that, the massacre that happened, forgive me while I find my words. It was an attack on so many levels. it was clearly an attack on Black people. It was an attack on the Black church as a traditional place of organization and a force in the movement for liberation. It was also a spiritual attack. And I don't think that everybody, necessarily recognizes that, but I'm sure as Spirit-led people that you recognize that. It was a spiritual attack. And what I saw in the aftermath, when I saw the family forgive the killer, it took my breath away, one, because I realized how rare it is that I actually see that kind of display of Christ-like behavior, just like really demonstrated like on that level. I mean, that was profound to me, and that just like touched my soul on a very deep level. But then in the aftermath of it, I saw a lot of frustration, frankly, from a lot of the people who I've been with in the movement who are tired of what they feel is like Black people just constantly forgiving, and it's more Black people die, and why did people have to die for you to recognize that the state is endorsing hate, with this symbol? Like, why does this have to happen? And there's a lot of anger that was coming out as well. It seemed like it was like really taking us to a negative place. And forgive me, I can't remember the exact scripture right now, but I just remember there was a warning that Christ gives where he says that many will turn from the faith because of the darkness, because the violence will just be so overwhelming that it will turn the hearts of many. And that was what I felt like I saw was happening. It was a crisis of faith moment. It was a crisis of faith moment for me. I remember the night that it happened. I called my sister and woke her up at like 3:00 in the morning because my sister's like a prayer warrior. And I said, I need you to pray for me because I don't even know how to process this moment that just happened. I mean, these were people sitting in the church, and somebody knocked on the door and they let him in, which is what you're supposed to do, right? There's nothing that Reverend Pinckney did that he's not supposed to do. There's nothing more that he could have done to try to heal his community and try to push everybody forward. And he was murdered. And it was just like a real crisis of faith moment for me. And this was before I met James. This was before I knew that the Confederate flag would be a thing, before all of that. And so then when that moment finally came, I got a call from an activist friend of mine in South Carolina, and he said, there's a team of people, they have looked at the flag, they think that it's possible for us to take it down. And this is something that he and I had said a long time ago. We were like, man, I wish I could take that flag down. Yeah, I think a lot of people felt that way, like, man, if I could just climb the pole and take that flag down. And he was like, do you want to come out to the meeting? And that's when I met James, and, we looked through all the logistics of it. And, of course, there were, 2 roles that were most likely to, you would get arrested for. And, of course, one of those included climbing the pole. And just long story short, after talking through all the different scenarios, I could feel it in my heart. Okay, Lord, I'm supposed to climb the pole. I got you. I know y'all know how that feels, right? Yeah, and I did. James was reminding me, like I did. I was like, okay, I gotta peel off. I, went back to another room and I prayed over it. I had to pray, but I knew that it was the right decision because I felt that peace that surpasses understanding, which I especially know in retrospect because I was like, that's crazy. You know what I mean? Especially when you look back on it, it's like, that's really crazy. But at the time, again, like having the Spirit with me, I was at a complete point of peace. But it's actually, and I don't want to talk too long, so cut me off because I ramble sometimes. It's actually, so like I was raised Christian. I was, raised going to church. But really I would point to like 2 years ago as the first time that I really felt the Holy Spirit and really began to understand on another level, after kind of years of like, going through my own spiritual journey and kind of searching for God. And I ended up back at Christ. But this particular moment, it really, I'm sure a lot of y'all out here can relate to it. I have been in churches where I've heard people stand up and give their testimony. You know what I mean? And I didn't understand what they were saying, but I was clapping because we had to clap along when Grandma gives her testimony. You know what I mean? But this was a moment, so I had the whole time a moment of peace and everything, but when I got back home, I'm about to cry. When I got back home and there was my grandmother and there were my nieces, and I really thought about Lord, like, where are you leading me? Like, this is dangerous, you know? And that was the first time I prayed that night, and I felt, I was like, my God, like, this is what Martin Luther King felt. Like, Martin Luther King had nights where he was on his knees praying like this. I know Malcolm X had nights where he was on, like, a lot of people had been through this, and I had not experienced the faith on that level. Thank you. But I received in my spirit. I received in my spirit that the Lord would be with me and that no harm would come my way. And it was just a constant kind of back and forth, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, of being certain about what the Spirit has called me, battling with my human doubt. But after that experience, you can't tell me anything. I mean, Christ is real.
That's so great. And, you know, one of the things that has really struck me about just hearing your story and hearing the narrative coming out of your story is the cloud of witnesses that surrounded you both, the organizing that went behind this action. You know, it wasn't some impromptu, one day you woke up and decided to take down the flag, right? There was a methodology behind it. There were a whole cloud of witnesses supporting you. And so I wonder if you all can both speak a little bit to who those cloud of witnesses were and the organizing and efforts that went behind that day of action.
So, yeah, actually, hello, everyone. Totally and completely humbled. Thank you all. But, so the organizing, I've been doing environmental justice organizing, environmental activism for about the last 5 years on a grassroots level, unpaid. And I've had the privilege of meeting some really amazing people with some really amazing skills, and learning from them, and really getting mentored during some of those processes. And so I don't know how many of y'all are aware of what environmental justice is, but it's the intersectionality between what you might consider your classical Sierra Club environmentalist and the social justice movement, you know, because the realization being that almost any time that there's environmental destruction, you'll find a displaced community, particularly typically a displaced community of color, you know. So whether that's a coal ash dump, for example, or whether that's Native American peoples being moved off their land so we can mine. So I got involved with that movement pretty heavily, and I've been doing a lot of work out of Appalachia, particularly with mountaintop removal for years around that stuff, which was the basis for me building the majority of my skills. I got a call from another environmental activist 3 days before me and Bree sat down and met for the first time. And he called me up, and he was like one of those type of guys that, like, when he calls, you know that he's gonna ask you something big, and like you also know that, like, he's not going to say it over the phone. so I was like, hey buddy, how you doing? Like, and he's like, hey, where are you? I was like, I'm driving back from the beach right now. He's like, yeah, you're in South Carolina? I was like, I am actually in South Carolina. He's like, you want to come through Columbia? And I was like, yeah, I guess I can come through Columbia, sure. and he's like, are you alone? And I'm like, no, my partner's with me. You know, one of our friends are with me. He's like, I'll meet you at your house on Monday. So I knew right away, actually, because of all the controversy around the flag coming out of the murder of the terrorist act, what I would consider a terrorist act. So I knew that it was probably something about the flag. He's just that friend, you know. So he had already been down there. He was down there when he called me. He was already down there, and he was doing the scouting. And he basically single-handedly created the scout report. He looked at all the logistics, and he wasn't quite sure, because I don't know if y'all remember, but no one was clear about whether or not the flag. Everybody was under the assumption the flag was locked to the pole, you know, which was a myth that power structures had created so people would never challenge power. You know, it's like so many of these myths were perpetuated throughout our culture that, like, so we don't actually go out and do the act, you know? We don't actually do what's radical, or like revolutionarily transformative, you know? So, like, So we were looking at it, though. He took some pretty high-resolution pictures of the flag. And we're looking at it, and I'm like, man, that is just a weight. That's not a lock, that's a weight, and those are swivel clasps. And he's like, I actually think that you're right. And we couldn't quite tell the top, but we were pretty sure that the top was the exact same way, too, And then, so he was like, do you want to be the climb assist on this? And I was like, man, I don't know if I want to do that. Like, I was like, I need to talk to my people, and before I can talk to my people, I need to meet the rest of the group, And so the following day, we met at one of Bree's friends' house. It was like a tribe house, a safe house, and it was actually ironically in a neighborhood that I kind of grew up hanging out in. So I felt right at home there, which is just super ironic. I missed the house at first. I went around the block. I was like, oh man, that's where one of my best friends used to live. That was pretty cool. And so then soon thereafter met Bree and the whole crowd, and we all started volunteering for roles. And everyone else had volunteered, and I really wanted to talk to my partner, my fiance, beforehand about the action. Like when you do arrestable actions like this, you usually have a policy of not telling anybody anything. It's a need-to-know basis, because the more other people around you know, the more the action can either be compromised, and also the more you put them at risk. Especially in an action like this, which was, has great potential for ramification in a lot of ways. I mean, white supremacy has perpetuated itself through violence as a means to an end, so the threat of violence is very real, I think that sometimes we're called to do something that's greater and bigger than ourselves, and when we get the calling, we either stand up and accept the calling, or we sit back down, So, and that's what's most important, is that people stand up, and people take the calling, and if they don't, they're missing out on what could be the most important thing in their entire lives, So anyway, I just kind of made the decision. I was like, okay, sure, I guess I'll do it, And that was immediately after Bree kind of she was like, oh man, I think I can do this, but I gotta step away. I gotta pray for and she was gone for an hour, and I was like, okay, I guess I'll do it, because I realized the framing nature of the action, what it would look like, that we were elevating a woman of color's voice in the whole thing, and that was what was so important for me, I mean, we need more heroes like Bree. Let's face it, we need more heroes like Bree. Hollywood's created plenty of white heroes. It's okay. I can be the guy that takes a backseat role this time, and next time I'll probably be happy to take another backseat role, and quite honestly, And so let me get actually into some hard stuff, and then I'll pass the mic over to Bree again. But some of the hard stuff, so coming out of Occupy movement, for example, I have a radical anarchist perspective towards liberation. I believe in horizontal people power. I don't believe in vertical systems of oppression or structure. And so in our organizing work, in that nature, we approach conversations so one of our guiding principles, at least in the group that I've been working with for almost the last 5 years, is this concept of step forward, step back. So people that have been taught that they have a voice, like the white straight guy that's sitting on the stage hogging the mic right now, they take a backseat role occasionally. They shut up. They learn to shut up. They accept shutting up, because this is the part that's really confusing. It's not that. It's not even that I want to dominate things. It's that I've been taught by society to dominate things. I've been taught that it's acceptable, and it's been perpetuated that I am the one that has the louder voice, the stronger voice, and should take that position, which is, as we know, ridiculous. And really leaves out every other voice that's actually important. So. Unfortunately, though, simultaneously, there's a responsibility of both parties, and the responsibility of the other party that needs to step forward. The people that are taught that their voices aren't as important need to step forward and take the mic when the white guy needs to shut up. So like, and just really, another guideline that we have is like what's called a progressive stack. So when we're just in our meetings, it's like we don't talk over each other. We don't do anything like that. We're not trying to just interject our point that we've been waiting to hold on to the entire time. It's like we wait in line, we listen to everybody. Somebody takes a note of who's next in line and to talk. But also the progressive stack is one that places first and foremost people of color, women, in any disadvantaged group, first. It prioritizes their voice in the conversation. So with that being said, I'm going to cede to Bree, my dear. Thank you all very much for having me, by the way, again.
Yeah, I mean, so after all this happened, obviously, and there's like the media reaction was actually more than we anticipated. I was actually just telling Jimmy a few minutes ago, I think it's kind of good that we didn't. We were a little bit naive about the reaction because it might have psyched us out otherwise. I mean, one of the reasons why we're so insistent on doing these things together is because I love all the love. Don't get me wrong, you know what I mean? But I want to make sure that everybody recognizes it was a group of 9 or 10 of us, and that was just who was in the room. There were other people who were contributing as well that came together, and I think that was part of. You didn't see that, you didn't see all the people, but you saw it. You saw it in how coordinated it was. You know what I mean? And I think that was what really struck a nerve, quite frankly, with the power structure as well, because this was organized. It wasn't, hey, let's just climb the pole kind of thing. It was a very thought out thing. We really sat down and we went through every possible scenario. I did carry things with me just in case I got up there and it was, bolted and I would have to cut something, because if I'm going to jail, I'm going to take the flag down with me. So. If I'm going, the flag's going. But the reason that we unhooked it, the reason that we didn't burn the flag was because we really wanted to show, even when it's taken down, in the most respectful, not too respectful. Let's not get carried away. The other day was a little too respectful, in my opinion, but that even when we kind of take it down in a very dignified, very peaceful, kind of way, we still get arrested for it. They still charge us with, defacing state property. They still haul us to jail immediately. One of the things that I raised up was I have been arrested. I've already spent more time in jail than the cop who abused a girl at a pool party in McKinney, Texas. Do you know what I mean? So, and so I think that's what made our action powerful, because, and I think that what I love about the impact that it has, I think it really reminded people of the power of civil disobedience in that kind of way, because what it did was it did not allow them to push the false narrative that they were trying to push about their legislative process. You know what I mean? And so by taking it down, by forcing them to raise it back up, and then to see them drag through this process of trying to add on amendments and just every kind of excuse to not take it down. And then, of course, as we saw that it is possible to lower the flag. So it could have been at half-staff at the very least when the casket passed. It's all of these things just highlight it. And I think as a group, because even when we first sat down and we were saying, well, do we want to do this? And, at that point, so, at first, when I wanted to take down the flag and I was so disgusted, that was even before, Nikki Haley had come out in support of taking it down and Barack Obama had come out in support of taking it down. But even after that, and we were talking about it, we were like, we can't let them do that. We can't let them take credit for taking that flag down because yeah, that's the power structure that it's intellectually dishonest, and so part of the reason why we were so insistent in taking it down and really drawing that clear moral contrast is because we have to make it clear it's not just about a flag, it's not just about a piece of fabric that flaps next to a metal pole, because if that were the case, you would take it down and fold it up every single day and it wouldn't be a big deal. It's about the ideology. And so that's why we felt that it was very important, in the symbology of that moment, for a black woman to take it down, to hand it to a white man. We are both children of the South. We're both descendants of this heritage and, this legacy. And so all of that. That's why I lift up that it was a group effort, because I think going forward, I hope that what we did can be a powerful model, for others to employ.
So I love that you guys insist on talking about how this was a group effort, how this was a highly planned action, because, one way that white supremacy tries to tell the story is this, Rosa Parks was tired and sat down on a bus. That woman trained at the Highlander Center. She wasn't just tired, right? So you guys trained. You scouted out. You knew what you were getting into, knew what you were doing. Even talking about risking arrest. I mean, these are things that we don't always talk about. And so let's talk about kind of then even that organizing moving forward. So that symbol is down. That one symbol is down. But yes, that's wonderful. But I will tell you, I live in Spring Hill, Tennessee, just outside of Nashville. And I was driving into Franklin the other day, and a store that in my memory had not had any flags outside before now doesn't have the, battle flag. It now has the actual flag of the Confederacy up, which is kind of this wink, wink. You think you're going to take away our flag, we're going to put up the big flag. So it's there's more work to be done. We all know that. So where do you see that organizing going forward? The symbolic move was amazing. That was that boost, right? And making that moral statement. Now, what's that movement forward?
Well, I think it's important. First of all, as I feel, this to me feels like the beginning in a lot of ways, So since really getting involved in activism, one of the things that I find really important and so crucial to my work is to go back and look at history and go back and look at, not just the way that history is remembered, but how it actually happened, to actually go back and see what was really all on the ground, in terms of organizing that was going on, especially in the 60s, in the civil rights movement of the 60s. And remembering, they had to sit at lunch counters and do these kinds of things to force that ugliness to reveal itself, because so often it stays hidden. And I think that's that's essentially where we're at right now. Now, I mean, if you really think back on it, the way that I kind of view the movement, especially how I kind of got into it, it was really kind of began with the Trayvon Martin case. And I kind of, there's lots of ways that you can kind of, determine how you look at the timeline and history and everything. But I kind of think that that's a valuable place to start in terms of where I see a lot of, especially young Black people, young Black Americans, getting involved in social justice was really arising from the Trayvon Martin case. So that was 2013. So in 2013, we had the Trayvon Martin case, which was kind of like Emmett Till. And then we had the Voting Rights Act get repealed, and our voting rights came under attack, which that was when I was like, what? This is too much like 1955, I got to get involved. And then we had, Ferguson happen. It's been several months. I think it was very weird when I was doing the whole media tour thing that I realized they don't seem to recognize where this actually falls from my perspective in terms of what's been going on, because it has been several months of police killings, of Black people being killed under very questionable circumstances, and nobody's really investigating it, and it just being kind of ignored. I mean, even the Charleston massacre, to be quite frank with you, as somebody who's on Facebook and I'm scrolling through and I see people just kind of going about their daily lives, and I'm like, I can't do that. I can't function today. This is like 9/11 to me, and so And so sometimes you have to do something, and as much as it on a deep level as a human being, it really frankly disturbs me that my unhooking a flag upsets you more than all these things that have happened over the past 2 years, that this rocks your consciousness. that's really disturbing, and I think it says something about the larger necrophilic culture that still values property over lives, especially Black lives. But sometimes that's what we have to do. I mean, the whole process of like going in and sitting at a lunch counter. You're aggravating. Yes, I am an agitator. Yes, that's what I am. And I think sometimes the establishment has done a really good job of making it seem that agitation is the opposite of peace. And so we've got a lot of I don't know, shade. I'm not trying to. Kind of shade, a little bit of shade. We have some older organizations that they don't want to actually agitate anything, and they don't want to actually push. But the thing is, I have to remind them, Gandhi's one of the biggest agitators that ever lived. Jesus Christ is one of the biggest agitators that ever lived, you know? That's what we have to do. That's what going into, I was just telling Jimmy as we were riding up here, if you go back and look, the only time Jesus was in the temple is when he was flipping stuff over and waking people up. And sometimes that's what we have to do, because we have to remind people that a lot of times what the establishment calls peace is really just order. Yeah. It's not peace. It's not peace. You know what I mean? And even, I point to Ferguson, even before Mike Brown was killed, even before things burned, that's not peace. That's violence. When you're living under police occupation, when you're afraid, when there's a symbol of hate that's flying and people are afraid to take it down because they're afraid of the retaliation, that's not a peaceful society. And if we really want to push for a truly peaceful society, we have to agitate. You know what I mean? And we did it in a nonviolent way, which I think is beautiful. But I just try to remind people of that. Agitation is an important part of it, and so I don't know if I'm rambling, if I'm answering your question, but in a lot of ways, I quite frankly feel like this is the beginning, because this is the first time that they really looked up and were like, oh snap, we can't just do whatever we want to do. We can't just ignore, because I think for a long time people were like, take down the flag, okay. Even people got massacred. Okay, we'll take it up for a legislative session and we'll discuss. I don't know if you guys saw the Larry Wilmore sketch. I thought it was really great. Where he was like, well, I think we'll have a mint julep and then we'll discuss the discussion of taking down the flag. I mean, but that was kind of the attitude. Because until people in power have to deal with you, they don't. They don't, quite frankly. And so in a lot of ways, I feel like this is the beginning. I hope that I really hope and pray that it's not going to be like the 60s. I don't think it will quite be on that level, because one of the beautiful things that I think came out of this was that you saw how many people actually supported that flag coming down. And there was not as much support for that flag being up there as I think they thought there was. So we're, yeah. So I think that we're really making progress, and I hope that in this demonstration, this really shows what the power of He came from environmental justice. I came from Black Lives Matter movement, and we came together for this action because we said this has to come down, and I think that we just have to find ways to work across issues, because as we were driving up here, which I told Jimmy, I was that should have been a podcast, our conversation. But we were really talking about how do we have to kind of elevate the awareness so that it is really about the liberation of humanity. Because I frankly view Black liberation as one struggle within this overall struggle of ending oppression itself. And so, yeah. So going forward, I think that there really have to be more of these kind of cross-issue actions. I guess that's how I would put it, yeah.
So this is our last question before turning it over to you all for a few folks to ask questions from the audience. And Bree, I so appreciated your conversation and including an analysis of history. And this question is actually one I learned from Reverend Alexia Salvatierra, who some of you got to be in session with today. And the question is this: as you think about your life and your work moving forward, what legacy are you carrying with you? And what legacy are you hoping to leave behind?
So, this is funny. This kind of actually reminds me of when people ask me, Bree, what do you do? And that's the hardest question for me to answer. Because at some point, this is going to sound so corny, but it's true. at some point I really stopped doing and just started being. And I think it was honestly like, I'm surrounded by Christians, so I can be honest about it. I was really just at a point where I was like, Lord, you already know what I want for my life. Like, you've already known things that I've dreamed of, things that I've wanted for my life. I'm giving all that up. You just tell me what you want for my life. And that was kind of like right, like when I first, like, you know, had really felt the Spirit come over me. And I just, in a way, I kind of like died to myself. Does that make sense? And so I'm not really living to create a legacy for myself. Does that make sense? Like, I'm not really, it's kind of, it's kind of hard to explain. I'm sure people who have like been in the Spirit like much longer than I have probably understand that. It's a newer thing for me to really know and understand, and especially after my experience of climbing the pole, where I really was like, I'm going to do this in faith, knowing that I might die, you know, that could happen, and do it in faith. And I think especially after having come through that experience and like really, really living the you know, to live is Christ, to die is gain. It's like really live that. Like if I live today, I'm doing the work of Christ. If I die today, I die doing the work of Christ. And I hope I'm remembered as someone who died doing the work of Christ. It has just really shifted my mindset. And so frankly, I just hope that when people look at me, they see Christ. They see the Christ in me. I hope that people see positivity. I hope they see light and love. That's the only thing that I can hope to leave behind. But it's really not about building my legacy. I want everyone to see that and feel it and bring it into themselves and become it and be the beautiful reflection of God that we're all called to be.
All right, so we have time for a few questions. Amy here has the mic. What? Well, we do have a festival, and we have time limits, and they have things they have to go do. So, yes, we do. But Amy is going to kind of try and grab some people and hand you a mic.
Two things. 85 Warren Wilson grad.
What's that?
Nice.
Oh.
I work in Charlotte. Nice. This isn't a question, it's a statement. I am humbled.
This is a question. I'm wondering, I want to hear from Bree, just hearing all of your incredible wisdom and awareness of things going on. How would you personally, I guess from your experiences, how would you define justice?
That is a really good question. I think, and in fact, like that's a question I really try to push more in organizing circles, because I think sometimes we get so caught on what we're fighting against that we forget to really devote time to figuring out what we're fighting for, and you know, and really making sure. I mean, if we're really talking about dismantling stuff, we also have to know what are we replacing it with. I really view, I think that justice to me is really a way of being that respects the humanity of every other being. Does that make sense? And I feel like if we push for that consciousness, that everything stems from that. I think peace stems from that, justice stems from that, because you can't truly fully recognize the humanity and fully empathize with someone else and treat them unjustly, you know? And I think, especially when you're looking at, one of my favorite passages from the Bible and from the teachings of Christ is when they ask him, what's the greatest commandment? And I think it's so profound, because he says that first is to love God with all your heart and all your being. And then he says the second is like it. which I think is really key. He says the second is like it, and that's to love your neighbor as yourself, which would imply that loving God is directly connected to your ability and your willingness to love others. And so I think that pushing for that and living that and encouraging that kind of consciousness leads us to justice.
Thank you so much for coming. You're both of you. Thank you. I'm a public school teacher in North Carolina, and we're feeling pretty defeated these days. And I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit to how, what role that plays in this whole scenario, education, public schools, the whole thing. Thank you.
What role does education play? Man, I mean, well, first of all, I'm completely biased because my parents were educators. So I grew up like, education is everything, you know. How do we solve poverty? Education. How do we solve hunger? Education, you know. But I think there's a whole lot of truth to that. I mean, one of the things I always point out to people is like when oppressive governments come into power, what's the first thing they come for? The teachers, the intellectuals, the students, the books, you know what I mean? And so it's not really a surprise that education is completely under attack because especially public education is one of the few avenues, especially for poor kids, to get a chance out. And so I applaud you guys so much. I have so much respect for teachers, especially like I did a little stint in the classroom and I was like, Lord, how do y'all do this? It's a lot. I mean, and I have a lot of teachers in my life, and I know y'all work a lot more than 40 hours a week, a lot. And I know that teachers are some of the most underappreciated freedom fighters in the world. So absolutely, I guess my to answer your question, everything. Like I think education, and I strongly believe in public education and making education more available and freer for everyone. We have actually the group that I organize with in Charlotte, half of us are teachers. And so teacher, and I'm an artist. So like when you get teachers and artists and students together, you know? So yeah.
One of the things that's so powerful about both of you is that you overcome the notion of the market. There's a lot of freedom fighters out there that are always trying to position themselves on Twitter or Facebook before they tell the revolution, before they actually are involved in revolutionary acts. So can you guys talk to me about, for some of us out there, about how to overcome the politics of respectability?
Woo! Yeah, do you want to?
I mean, because well, go ahead. Sorry.
I'll talk briefly about
Yeah, sure.
I mean, yeah, so let me just, I think one of the most relevant things here for me coming out of that conversation, especially being a part of this action, is that as a white Southerner, I'm taught by our society down here to be silent in the face of racism, you know, and to not confront it on a regular basis, you know? And so, for example, so that's what's respectable, is to let the system of oppression, you know, continue into perpetuity, you know, because these are the power structures that exist, and their whole specific function is to perpetuate themselves indefinitely, you know. So respectability. I mean, like I think that. One of my friends told me recently, they were like, Jimmy, you have no shame. And I was like, I guess I don't. I got no shame, you know? I don't care, you know? Like, I don't care enough about, like, what you think about me to, like, let that stop me from doing the right thing, you know? And so, like, you know, I mean, but mainly, I mean, let me say this, because I think that if there's any message that I would want to pass home to white America, it's that, like, to really actually... I mean, if you were an enlightened person, like we all seem to be probably sitting in this room, you know, and you think that racism is a bad thing, or you think that white supremacy is a very real thing and it's horrible, you know, it's like you're not going to do anything about it by being silent. You're actually, what you're doing is you're perpetuating white supremacy by being silent in the face of it. You understand what I'm saying? Like, what you're actually doing through your silence is being violent. You know, you might not realize it. You might not be the violent individual, but your silence is overwhelmingly ringing, you know? And it rings profound for everybody that's around you. And everybody else that might just see it from a distance hears it too, you know? And so, like, that my one biggest message, particularly to white America, in this particular conversation, because let's be honest, it is a multifaceted conversation, and it has multiple angles, you know? And we could get into that whole theology, that theory itself, but more importantly, I mean, to really actually fight, I mean, okay, so as white people too, let me back up real quick. As white people, we're the ones that perpetuate white supremacy. Sit with that for a second. As white people, we're the ones that perpetuate white supremacy, you know? And how do we do that? How do I do that as an individual? I stay silent when one of my friends, because you know what? We all want friends, right? We want friends. We don't want to be disliked. We don't want to be shunned ourselves, and that's part of the fear process, and that's part of the intimidation process that has allowed white supremacy to be perpetuated, you know? And so I guess I would just say that, like, no, you call it out exactly where you see it. You call it out loud and clear, and you tell them that it's unacceptable, that you are not going to stand for it, that you are not going to sit idly by and let your friends or your family members or your coworkers espouse such hate. You know, and because we all have an option. We all have an option about who our friends are. You know, who do we actually want surrounding? Do we want someone that's actually that toxic to be around us, you know, in our day-to-day lives and our day-to-day experiences, you know? I don't know, you know, I don't. I know that I can't live around toxicity, you know? And so, like, so it's just one of those things that's like, just know that no matter what, even if you lose friends around you by standing up for what's right, you are being held and cherished by God at all times, you know? So it's okay. And we all have weak moments. You know, we all sometimes don't feel the power of God around us, you know? It's easy to not. You have to sometimes be paying attention, you know? And sometimes it's very easy, you know? But sometimes we're in dark places, you know? But, like, I guess for me, that's the most important part, is, like, that whole thing about, like, just being quiet, being respectable, you know, like particularly down here in the South, the respectable white gentleman thing, you know, that was the guy that was actually the guy that owned slaves, by the way, you know, that was the white guy that owned the slaves, that beat them and had them whipped and, you know, and enslaved them to begin with, you know, so I would just really push back against that, you know, what is respectable and what is right are two very different things most of the time, so.
I think respectability politics died when Barack Obama got elected. Among my generation especially, I would say, because what I've observed is there are a lot of young black people like me who organized for Barack Obama and, you know, are crying tears and I was calling my grandma when he got elected. We've turned a corner and everything's different now. And then to, like, just see the racist backlash that came up. And so then to, like, look and be like, wow, if, like, what, you don't get more respectable than, like, the president of the United States. You know, like, it's just not possible. Not in America. There's no more up there position. You know what I mean? Like, you can't socially elevate as a black person beyond being the first black president with your gorgeous wife with the great arms and your adorable kids and your dog named Bo, you know, and your Christmas tree and the white, like, I mean, there's, like, what more can you do? And I think I think for a lot of us to really look at that, we were like, so maybe we need to question this theory again that by just being a good kid, I don't get beaten by the cops. And so I think that has challenged, and I think you find especially, like, what generational clashes you do see, it's between, like, you know, some of the people who still hold on to those respectability politics and to the young people who we reject it. We simply reject it. I reject it not just because I have seen that it's not true, but even if it were true, I would reject it, because you should be respected because you're a human being, not because of your job or your education or how well spoken you are or the suits you wear. I mean, one of the advantages that I have, you know, what privilege I actually do have as a black woman in America, being, you know, from a more middle class background and you know, being well educated, everybody's like, oh, you're so well spoken, like, you know, I'll listen to what you say maybe. but really, no, but really, I mean, in the same way that James volunteered his, he's like using his privilege in that moment to dress as a construction worker, so maybe it slows people for a second. As this black woman's climbing the pole, they're like, but there's a white guy at the bottom, so maybe it's legitimate. It might be okay. Right. Just cleaning the flag. Right. So in some ways, but it's real. Especially like when I'm moving in circles, especially like among some more middle class Jack and Jill black circles. It's effective for me to be like, actually, I think you're really underestimating what people are up against in America, because I think we kind of split, especially in the black community. Middle class black people benefited a whole lot more after integration than the majority of black people did. And I think that a lot of people have missed that, including middle class black people. So long story short, respectability politics are dead. Bury them. Let's move on.